Broadband Breakfast Live Online for Wednesday, April 28th, 2021. My name is Drew Clark. I'm editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. Very happy to be here for a great episode of our topic in terms of how we can take tomorrow's speeds to today's infrastructure. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we introduce our guests and our topic matter in greater detail. Before we get there, though, I do want to thank our sponsor for today's session, Positron Access. And Positron Access is very keen on ensuring that there are carrier-grade telecommunications products that increase bandwidth delivered and distance covered within core and residential networks. I also want to call attention to our upcoming events. We're going to be doing something a little bit different for the month of May. We're calling this our Ask Us Anything series. So instead of having an array of guests like we normally have on our Broadband Breakfast Live Online events, we'll be hearing from you, our audience. We're going to basically take your questions on 4 particular topics. On May 5th, we're going to be talking about the Emergency Broadband Benefit and the Emergency Connectivity Fund. On May 12th, we're going to be talking about net neutrality. On May 19th, we'll talk about radio frequency and spectrum, particularly spectrum sharing. And on May 26th, it'll be Ask Us Anything about Section 230. So that's the lineup. You can find all of these at Broadband Breakfast. I'll shoot the email into the chat window for those who are watching via Zoom, but basically at broadbandbreakfast.com/BBLO. You can see our list of upcoming events, and we'll have little videos that introduce these topics on our site later today and in coming weeks. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn to our guests. We have for this discussion today, Reg Weiser, who is the founder and CEO of Positron Access Solutions, which enables gigabit services over telephone and coax wiring. Reg also is a recipient of the Quebec Entrepreneur of the Year Award, the Export Canada Award, and is a member of the Canadian Engineering Academy. Welcome and thanks for being with us, Reg.
Thank you.
We are also joined by his colleague at Positron Access. That's Pierre Trudeau. Pierre is a technology executive. He's the president and CTO. Is that right, Pierre?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Of Positron Access. Prior to joining in 2013 to lead the development of its gigabit access multiplexer, which we'll hear more about today, he founded Colobris Network, a leader in Wi-Fi solutions for wireless ISP carriers and enterprises. So welcome and thank you for being with us as well, Pierre. We're very happy to have both of you to have this discussion about our topic. And our topic for today, just in a little bit greater detail, is to sketch out some of these issues that we have. So obviously there's been a lot of talk about next generation networks and fiber networks and even gigabit wireless networks we're seeing more real implementations of. But still, in spite of however fast we get to these faster and newer generation networks, there still will be a lot of America and other countries that will rely on older technologies in an increasingly bandwidth-hungry world. So in this discussion, we want to talk about examples of innovative solutions that can increase capabilities and infrastructure that already exists. And obviously, Positron Access provides one example of that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how the solution works, Reg? What is your product that we've been referring to, and how does it help address this particular problem or question?
Okay, well, we're not trying to replace or be an alternative to the existing new technologies and the fiber and fixed wireless. Effectively, we're extending their range and doing it so much more cost effectively to enable many more subscribers to be connected much more easily at far lower cost. In other words, if you have the fixed wireless or fiber bandwidth, the biggest difficulty is distributing it in multi-dwelling units, which effectively are underserved in general because most buildings are more than 10, 15 years old and don't have a fiber infrastructure. And so effectively, that is very costly, up to $600 to $800 per door in the US. And we developed the methodology to be able to do so over the existing in-building telephone pairs or coaxial cables. And that also applies in rural areas because it could be outdoors. For example, you would have bandwidth available at the curb and you want to get it into the homes, and you could eliminate the need to bring wiring into the house, new fiber wiring, by using the existing wiring that exists. So we wanted to effectively rapidly enable the expansion of bandwidth at low cost, enabling many more people to get service quickly.
So tell us a little bit more about the solution. I've referred to it as the gigabit access multiplexer. How you as a company came up with this and what it does in some level of technical detail, not drilling into it per se, but just what does it do generally?
I'll let Pierre be a little more responsive on it, but what I'll basically say is we're using the same type of technology, which is an ITU standard that is used to bring extenders to Wi-Fi in homes over the power lines. So it's a very robust type of technology, and it's been adapted by us to work over telephone.
I know it looks like we've lost Reg.
Coaxial cables, and we have software.
So while we're waiting for
maybe I can elaborate on that.
Yeah, please go ahead, Pierre. Yeah,
right. So Reg, your image was freezing, so I was just starting to explain. The ITU-T standard is a technology called G.HN, and it really means how you can deliver gigabit speeds on the existing in-building wiring, whether it is telephone pairs or any kind of copper pairs or coaxial cable. And the main difference that we have over, say, DSL technologies, over DOCSIS that are also very well known, is at the core of our product, we are as we say, an access multiplexer. So we have upwards of 80 gigabits per second of throughput that we can handle inside the building. So that when we take a 1 to 10 gig feed into the building, whether it is fiber-based or fixed wireless, we can really maximize the distribution of that signal to multiple tenants inside the building and have an infrastructure that is ready for the next 10 gig or 40 gig future delivery and not have to replace what is in the building.
So let me kind of broaden this question out and see if either of you want to address it. So part of the challenge in broadband deployment is the last mile. Again, it's a problem we've all heard of for years and years. But in some ways, it's really the last 100 feet, right? Is that a true statement? And if it is just the last 100 feet, are you basically saying, well, actually, it isn't the last 100 feet. We don't have to worry about the last 100 feet. All you need to worry about is getting a high bandwidth or high capacity technology to within spitting distance of your endpoint, whether it's a home or garden apartments or other facilities. Tell us just a little bit about how you think of the middle mile, last 100 feet in a broadband deployment. Let's start with you, Reg.
Essentially, it's more than 100 feet. It's the last 800 feet effectively, because we're able to do basically the standard DSL type technologies or gigabit Ethernet switches can only go about 100 feet, and that's not nearly enough to be able to deliver high bandwidth. So anywhere but you have a distance of 800 feet, we will deliver 800 gigabit, 1 gigabit symmetrical to that location. And we start off at 1.7 gigabits, and over coax, we'll do that at 2,600 feet.
So again, there's a standard for let's just take GPON, gigabit passive optical network, that brings, what, as I understand it, is it a 2.5 gigabit down and 1.25 gigabit up. If you're getting a PON fiber technology to within 800 feet, what happens next, either with your technology, positron access, or with another technology? What's kind of happening on that last 100 or so, or several hundred feet, that either degrades or maintains the quality of the connection that the provider is bringing?
Yeah, actually, the challenge is not necessarily the quality of, so basically, it's not about the quality of the link, it's more about the cost and complexity of bringing that link together. So basically what that means is, if you could bring fiber to every door in the building, that'd be fantastic. The reality is that's not cost effective. It's extremely disruptive if the building is not readily set for that. So that's what we do, is we bring wherever the broadband access technology. So it's fiber-based, GPON, XGS-PON, fixed wireless, Telegraph, whatever it is, we're good with all that. And then we take that at the point where that service terminates. So with fiber, it's often at the curb, could be a wiring closet inside a larger building. If it's fixed wireless, it's outdoors almost certainly, because these 5G signals and millimeter wave do not penetrate efficiently buildings. That's where we come in. We take that signal and then distribute it over the existing infrastructure. So that's really where we focus our services and capabilities.
No, and that's great. So before your implementation of this technology, Reg and Pierre, what was the alternative, if you will? What are others who are trying to solve this problem of getting that connectivity over those apartment buildings or those existing lines without having to tear everything up? What are the ways that the bandwidth is getting distributed within such an environment?
Well, part of the question is the bandwidth getting to the tenants into the building. What we have seen, if it's over DOCSIS, so coax, you have legacy coax, but DOCSIS will deal with it. They have limitations mostly in the upstream direction, but for downstream, if you're okay with 100 megabits, DOCSIS will do the trick. If you want more than that, if you want to do a lot more upstream, that's where DOCSIS kind of falls apart. In terms of fiber, what's happening is a lot of times you'll have fiber in front of an MDU, but it just keeps going. We'll go to the next building that is easy to deal with fiber, and that one building that may have hundreds of tenants, 500 tenants, will not get the service, although it's right there in front of the building. And that's where we come in, because we fill the gap with what the Broadband Forum has started to call fiber to the extension point. So we extend the fiber service, and we can actually stretch it that we extend the fixed wireless service as well.
Reg, this is something that we've talked about before, where you have I guess the one version of the problem statement is that there are fiber builds happening, and sometimes buildings that might be great candidates are getting passed over because of their wiring situation. Could you talk a little bit more about that problem, Reg?
Yes, essentially, it's always good to go with fiber in a brand new build, because it doesn't cost any more, it doesn't cost much more, a huge amount more to put that in over other wiring. But in existing buildings and existing rural area wiring, you don't have that luxury. And it's the real difficulty of being able to bring the bandwidth further into the building to the subscriber. So what they do is, it costs so much to put the wiring fiber wiring into the building, that they look to get many subscribers in advance, and they pass buildings that don't have fiber wiring in favor of other buildings that do, because the ROI is very low and takes them a long time to get full service, in which case those buildings stay underserved for long periods of time. And what we do is by saying, okay, let's eliminate that, because the wiring all exists. You don't have to build it. You can just put in the equipment you need to serve those tenants that want it immediately, and you can be profitable right away from square one, zero, even if you get low initial subscriber take rates, so that you're always profitable because the solution is scalable and the wiring already exists.
So going into this existing standard, and let's just talk again about what is part of the standard community and what is unique to what you've implemented or your solution. The G.HN is apparently a standard. Could you just speak to that, and what have you done differently or on top of that standard to implement your solution to enabling still older infrastructure to have access to this technology?
So maybe I'll take this one. So G.HN is an ITU-T standard. So that's the international body that does all of the telecom standards. So that's all of the DSL technology, GPON, are all defined by the same study group, if you like. What we have done is two things. One is operation over copper pairs is susceptible to crosstalk or noise. It's inherent to the type of telephone wiring from the very first telephone call from
just say that sentence again. Just say that there was something there, but there were technical words I probably stumbled on.
Okay, so basically, when you operate over copper pairs or telephone pairs, there's crosstalk. That's basically electrical noise from other pairs in the same bigger cable binder. Laws of physics, you cannot really prevent this, but there are ways to mitigate it. So we have taken what the standard calls for in terms of mitigation and have built upon that to make it more robust. And also we have improved the dynamic transmit capabilities or dynamic bandwidth capabilities of the standard. You have, Reg pointed out, we have up to 1.7 gigabit of bandwidth that we can allocate to any given customer. That gives us flexibility because we can dedicate enough bandwidth either in the upstream or downstream direction and deal with it dynamically based on the actual demand of a customer, which the legacy technologies like DOCSIS or even GPON are very asymmetrical, meaning that there's a lot of bandwidth downstream, but a tiny fraction upstream.
So let's distinguish between these two questions, right? The symmetrical down and up, and then the technology type, right? And so what I heard both of you say a little bit earlier is that your implementation, your technology doesn't distinguish between, let's say, a fiber or a ultra fast wireless connection, fixed wireless connection that a building might have. Talk a little bit about that. What do you find? Again, maybe fiber is going to be better if it can, but I assume there are implementations where there's wireless coming into a building antenna, and then boom, there's an access point, there's a distribution over existing wiring. How does the technology interface with those different technology types? And again, with a little nod towards how does the symmetricality or lack thereof impact the quality of the broadband that's distributed?
Okay. So if we take a step back for about symmetrical, because you had kind of two questions there. What is critical is to allocate the bandwidth in the direction where it needs to be assigned to at any given point in time. So sometimes right now we're doing the Zoom session, so we have our cameras on, we need a lot more upstream bandwidth. After that, you go take a pause and then look at some TV content, entertainment content. You're only downloading, you don't need much upstream. So we will react in time and optimize the use of the spectrum based on the actual usage. So that's one of the key differentiators that we bring. Then if you look at all of these access technologies, whether it is any kind of fiber, whether it's passive optical network or what we call active fiber, or whether it is any kind of fixed wireless with millimeter wave or anything that gives us gigabit speeds and above, they all provide Ethernet connectivity at the end of the day. So the output of these PON modems or ONTs, the output of the radio themselves, it's always an Ethernet signal. And this is what we input into the GAM, and the GAM is at the core an Ethernet switch, but we then deliver Ethernet over the existing medium. So everything is always the same. That's why we refer to fiber to the extension point, because it's always Ethernet. It may have different media techniques to carry Ethernet traffic, but at the end of the day, it is Ethernet. So that's how we can easily blend these access technologies. Some are brand new, like Telegraph for fixed wireless, that is the Facebook initiative that is now taking the industry quite aggressively. And then you have some legacy LMDS radios, souped up Wi-Fi, 4G, 5G, and then you have all of the fiber variations. All of them are okay for us to use as the backbone service and then distribute inside the building.
Right.
And then,
do you want to? No, go ahead. Finish up to Pierre. They didn't mean to cut out there.
Just then, if we take a step back, why does that matter? Is now we can address buildings that otherwise would be passed by any of these technologies. And we hear the word digital divide. And people think of digital divide is rural market with the big focus on RDOF. And yes, this is indeed one element of digital divide, but we have helped local government, county governments, to cross digital divides in their core downtown neighborhoods that are ignored by the incumbent operators. Because
what are some?
Go ahead.
No, please go ahead. I don't want to stop you.
So an example is we work with Montgomery County in Maryland, so I don't know, 50, 60 miles outside of DC, where it was a brand new building with fiber, but that building was put together by a couple of that had a son with special needs. And he was becoming a young adult, wanted to kind of go in his own apartment, but needs the kind of services and supervision that the average adult doesn't necessarily require. So they built this brand new facility with 70 rooms, so 70 apartments, and they had the local ILEC came in and put fiber, the cable guys put in coax, but also they wanted to charge for the service. The county said, hold on, we have our private county-wide fiber network. We'll drop a fiber to your building and we'll offer free of charge 50 megabit services to all of the tenants, because their portion of that are adults with special needs and others are low family incomes. And now that this was a wild success and we were using the coax infrastructure in this case, we're now working with the same county to go with their subsidized housing projects that suffer from the same thing. You have people there that need better access to better tools, better education, and can't really afford it. And the county having, the local government having this mission to help their people is critical.
So what were you able to do that wouldn't have happened without your implementation, your technology, Pierre?
Well, basically, we were able to provide this high-speed access at a fraction of the cost of any of the alternatives. And it was installed in a matter of days. And that was testing everything end-to-end, making sure that everything was robust and very easy to interface with a managed Wi-Fi solution from Plume. Plume is also doing very well there. And there was a Cisco backend. So it was a multi-party coming together at a fraction of the cost of the other available solutions from the incumbent operators over fiber, in one case, or over copper, over coax if it had been DOCSIS, and do that at 20–30% of the cost in less time. So there's a time to market consideration that is now appealing to the operators that were passing those markets and suddenly becoming ready for, and I saw a note on the chat, I like the term digital inclusion. So we're trying to address the divide and turn that into inclusion with all of the benefits that brings to the local economy and to the people that are otherwise excluded.
Do you want to weigh in on this point, and then we'll kind of again step out a little bit to some questions about the future and how we implement some questions addressing Bruce Wolf's question on the digital divide.
Yeah, so what we're doing in, also that was a core downtown area.
I just wanted to give Reg a chance.
Yeah.
Did you want to add anything further?
So Reg, do you want to talk about what we're doing with RDOF and helping people that suffer from constraints of GPON?
I'll mention a few other things. Technology is completely compatible with all existing residential gateways and so forth, and it seamlessly connects to whether you come in from a fiber input or from a fixed wireless input. Essentially, in rural areas, the same thing is effectively applied to save dramatically on the cost. The cost of taking fiber from the curb or fixed wireless from a fixed wireless point to antenna in the building, and the effort in doing so, and landscaping and so forth, we completely eliminate that by simply using the existing cabling. It not only takes you to the home, but also takes you into the home. You don't have to take fiber into the house. The technology consists of the end piece that goes into the home is the size of a deck of playing cards, and it reconverts the G.hn back into gigabit Ethernet. So effectively, you don't have to enter the house in order to, or the condo or apartment. You just get it to the subscriber. When he plugs the thing in, they just swipe, we know what it is, and he just installs it just ahead of the residential gateway. So you save that as well. That's for service calls, for anything. So it's a very effective. The whole idea being, how can we make this thing happen much faster without all the extra manpower, and make the best use of extending the existing excellent technologies?
Wonderful, thank you. Now we've gotten some questions. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat, or send them to everyone or to myself. Or if you'd like to ask a question on camera, just send me a chat message. What are some of the ways that we can tackle this problem of the digital divide, right? Again, Bruce Wolf says digital divide is the problem, digital inclusion is the solution. We must forge ahead, focusing on filling the glass full. How do we address that? I mean, again, and think as broadly as you can, what are some of the issues associated with digital inclusion and enhancing better broadband connectivity? Matthew Snyder has just raised the issue of affordability, right? Does your system address this, and how?
So when we compare to a all fiber solution, Reg pointed out, it's about $600 to $800 per door in a building. If you do kind of the complementary math, we will save 60 to 70% of that cost to whoever does the installation of our connectivity solution inside the building to offer the same service. So if you think of $600, we're costing basically just over $200 compared to $600. Times buildings with hundreds of doors, suddenly that becomes a massive capital expense that we eliminate. The other thing is time to market. What we're seeing with RDOF, people are saying, finally, my community will get connectivity. Well, you're going to see fiber along the county road, along the rural road, because that's where it will be deployed by the RDOF recipients. It may take a while before they come back and then say, okay, now I'm ready to connect you to that fiber drop. And if it means bringing another crew of probably 2 people with directional boring equipment, because you're 300-400 feet from the road, and you don't want to mess up your landscape that you have in your house. And you're a small business, probably, if you're farming, doing anything with agriculture. It's a small, medium business. You need a lot more connectivity than people may think. Now, you may need to wait quite a while before you get connected. If you could use a telephone technician that is used to patch copper pairs, that does that in their sleep, they can turn you up in 15-20 minutes. No heavy equipment required because they're using the copper pairs, for instance. So that's how we make it more affordable and reduce the time it takes to turn you on. With limited technical crews, it helps. Everything counts here. It's a multitude of elements that we facilitate by being able to operate in legacy environments.
So how will this, go ahead, Reg.
Well, one of the major issues in deployment of RDOF in the rural areas is manpower available to do that. And a lot of the winners don't have the manpower to do it. And the question is, how will they get this thing done within the time frame? And this significantly mitigates that problem.
So great. I want us to keep talking about the digital divide and the inclusion, but I want to come back to an issue that I'm not sure we sort of fleshed out fully, which is the symmetricality. What are the pluses, and is it oversold, right? Why is symmetrical connectivity important, and what technologies enable that versus those that have problems or difficulties in providing those kinds of upstreams that are possible?
So symmetrical services are kind of a result of years ago. The technologies were all symmetrical. Think of T1 lines and X25, ISD, and SNA. All these older technologies were all for businesses and were all symmetrical. And when it started to evolve to Ethernet speeds, obviously Ethernet is symmetrical by nature, and the carriers were pitching the value of symmetrical and charging for that significantly more than a residential asymmetrical service would be like. And that used to matter when you had a 1 megabit upstream with DSL compared to someone having a 10 or 100 megabit with their Ethernet service. Also, that made a huge difference. With our technology, it's what I call real-time symmetrical, meaning that you can get gigabit speeds in the direction that you need at the time that you need. But if you try to have a symmetrical gigabit service from your home, I'm not sure what you're trying to do to begin with, but let's assume that you do that, then yes, you probably want to spend the $1,000 a month for your connectivity by a carrier Ethernet operator. If you want your $59 or $69 gigabit speed, you will be able to do this massive upload at a gigabit. Let's say you're a video editor and you do special effects and you need to upload your sequence to a server somewhere. Unless you have a gigabit speed, it may take you an hour to upload that video content. So yeah, there it will matter. But while you're doing this, you're probably not downloading that much. And if you're downloading, maybe you'll get 500 meg down and a gig up, which is still excellent for that kind of money.
But aren't MDUs going to be managing the bandwidth anyway? They're getting a point, they're getting at an access point, some kind of capacity, some measure of down and up, and they're able to distribute this among their tenants. Talk to us about the management of bandwidth in specifically an MDU, multiple dwelling unit environment.
So MDU has as many type of users as you have tenants in the MDU. They all use the internet differently. The peak times used to be 7 to 11. Now it's 24 hours a day almost, but it changes all the time. The average consumption is in the 30 to 40 megabits per second, even for people that subscribe to a gigabit service. Well, once in a while, they'll peak probably close to 100 meg if they're really power users. No one really is consuming in any kind of sustained fashion anything above that kind of service. Even if you're doing 8K TV, right now, if you do Netflix HD, it's 5-6 megabits per second. If you do 8K, it's probably around 20 megabits per second. So you're still quite a way beyond where you would exceed the capacity of G.hn. And also because we have this core Ethernet switch, we have switching capacity of 80 gigabits per second, which is more than enough.
We've gotten a good question here from Jason Cohen, and so I want to ask it of both of you. Pairing this technology with the tools to help consumers find how to stream the content they need is a game changer. The more broadband first providers can answer, how do I get my TV through streaming easily, you can increase penetration, higher speeds, etc. Do you want to take that, Pierre or Reg?
Either way, Reg, you want to take that one?
I'll let you take it, but
okay. So basically, I agree. Get the bandwidth from your service provider. You want bandwidth. It's kind of the plumbing to an extent. Where you want to consume your services from, there you want the ability to choose wherever you prefer and at the moment that you prefer. And what we ensure is that we have a high quality distribution of the bandwidth, but also make sure that a power user in a building will not starve the other subscribers in that same building. So everyone will be treated, I guess, fair, not as, fair, that no one will abuse their higher bandwidth to take away from somebody else. So if you have, take an example, a gigabit user and a lot of 100 megabit users, the gigabit user will not be able to fill the pipe just for his or her own traffic. It will be balanced with the other subscribers so that no one starves. So there's so it's, I see a question from Bruce. So it's a mix of quality of service and load balancing and traffic policing.
Please, just Pierre, Reg, just before you jump in, just unpack that a little bit. What is a quality of service and what is a load balancing approach, and how do those differ?
So quality of service is to recognize that not all traffic is equal. If you send an email, it may take milliseconds more, no one will ever know. If you're streaming traffic, if you're doing a session like this, if you're doing voice over IP, there you need to be mindful, recognize the traffic and treat it with higher priority than your, I would call it, average or more mundane traffic that can tolerate some delays and that no one would ever notice. So that's quality of service. So you basically, it's like having a high priority letter from your preferred carrier versus a regular mail. Load balancing is then saying we have finite amount of bandwidth to the internet, whether it's fiber or a fixed wireless type of solution. So when there is a over subscription, so the demand in the building is higher than the capacity of the uplink, then you want to balance out that no one gets a unfair share versus the others. So it's getting fraction of traffic, and then you again use quality of service as a mean to say what can you delay and what do you need to absolutely send across.
Okay, Reg.
Yeah, the comment I wanted to make is that if you do a speed test with our product, you'll get a gigabit upstream and a gigabit downstream. You'll see that in the speed test. But to also accentuate another point, our product could also be used in mixed-use buildings and applications. For example, you can have business applications and give certain users guaranteed bandwidth. You can allocate it any way you want. You have all the most sophisticated controls that carriers want for business use, and you can also have the type of up to guarantees for consumers. So you have the ability to completely control that. So,
Pierre, anything further on this before I move to another question?
Well, I could talk for hours on this topic, and I'll leave it up to you if you want to bring up other elements.
So there's multiple broadband infrastructure plans on the table right now. The Biden administration, less than a month ago, put forth principles, right? These have not been reduced to legislative language, although there are several bills, each of whom is claiming that they're the vehicle or plan to be the vehicle for the Biden administration plan. And we've covered people who are supportive of this and people who are critical of this approach, at least what they are perceiving this approach to being. So what I want to ask, and forgive me if this delves into technology, and we're trying to disentangle this. We're trying to understand how we can use existing technologies to get higher speeds. But if you are building infrastructure, what is your view, Pierre and Reg, about whether one should be focused on speeds, symmetrical speeds, a particular technology, or are there ways that you don't want to kind of pass by? Let's just call them non-fiber technologies. Is that something that policymakers should be focused on, or should they just put that question aside and say, how do we get the highest quality infrastructure to as many places in the United States as possible?
Well, I think that you have to, the administration, the politicians need to make sure that the funding is available, but I think they should leave these technology choices to whoever needs to put in place the infrastructure. As long as the target in terms of say, your infrastructure shall allow for these targets. For instance, if you want to build a road, you want to build a water plant and all that, you have some matrix. You have to allow for this much traffic, this much water to feed into this neighborhood. We need the same kind of thing in terms of the bandwidth, the capabilities, or how fat is the pipe. But to declare that it has to be fiber only, for instance, or that LEOs, low Earth orbit satellites, are bad, I think that's not the government's choice. It's up to the industry, and in some cases, you may want to have a little bit of competition so that the end customer has some choice, so that they can pick whoever delivers the utility service that meets their needs, their wallet, their budget, and kind of give some options. It's hard in low density markets to give options. There are less operators willing to enter that market, but I think the funding will definitely help to solve some of that.
Great, Reg.
Some of the previous thoughts, though, have to be discounted, because while it's great having fiber directly to the end user, when you're talking about old infrastructure, that's super costly to do. And your main objective, the main objective should be deliver the bandwidth as quickly as possible at the lowest cost possible to as many subscribers as possible. And essentially, to go to the latest, you can ultimately deliver 10 gigabits on fiber, and this will also be possible to subscribers, and this will also be possible in next versions of G.hn. But the issue is, how do you not miss generations and all of these people that need the bandwidth now? And essentially, the ROI on doing something of this nature is measured in months, not in years. So all these people need the bandwidth, and this is the only way it could be delivered quickly. In fact, you can even allocate significantly less funds if carriers use the right technologies to deliver it.
What is the point you just made about not kind of promoting the future over the present say about, again, existing technologies that are out there, and what tools existing, let's just say, keep with building owners, what tools can existing building owners do to enhance their experience for connectivity within them? What are some other tools, I should say, besides perhaps, your own tool? What are other ways that they can help people get a better bang for their buck?
Well, you could bring fiber to every door at a certain cost, and I'm talking mainly about existing infrastructure. And as long as you can deliver gigabit symmetrical speeds to subscribers, it doesn't matter how you do it.
Okay, Pierre?
I think I would agree with Reg. The building owners have to, sometimes they were tempted into getting exclusive agreements with a given operator. And that limits the choice and access to probably better solutions. If they can take a step back and say, we will allow more innovative operators into the building, into the property, that would help, I think, address some of the limitations that right now exclusive agreements may provide. And that gives also incentives for the operators to provide a better service, because you no longer have a fixed audience.
Well, and I was wanting to kind of gear towards this. This is another topic, which is to say, what are some of the issues in the MDU space? And does I don't know, do you have a concern or a thought about the debate about requiring building owners to allow competitive choices?
Well, is it the building owner or the incumbents and the contracts that have been put in place that restrict competition? And I said, Bruce said a question about long-term franchise incumbents or agreements that are in place. Is that for the good of the people, for the good of the tenants of that building, to be stuck with a given operator that has a 5-year or 10-year agreement that no one can push aside?
Well, let's just read Bruce's question because San Francisco is where this issue has come up. Here in San Francisco, the lowest cost is municipal fiber because it's not profit-centered and is service-oriented, but the incumbents have been lobbying hard for over a decade, blocking approval by public officials. So, and Pierre, you're replying to tell all of our audience what you just replied there.
Well, there was a question to Jason about, who was asking about, is access to chipsets going to slow down RDOF? It might. Right now, the focus is with the fiber material itself, but the chipsets is something that we as a vendor are working with our suppliers. It's going to take a year, at least, to kind of get back to some semblance of normality before we can have predictability into access, availability of chipsets. So we're working with our customers to give us as much forecast, and then we're doing all of the begging and dancing dance with our suppliers to get our access to the chipsets so we can serve our customers. But
yeah, and this issue of bottlenecks and challenges in RDOF and rural builds and other builds is something we've addressed in previous Broadband Breakfast Live Online events, and certainly hope to continue to address it. Encourage you to see some of our past programs on these questions. Just another minute or two on this question of MDUs and some of the policy issues that exist. Incumbency, ownership, your solution, I assume, is a building owner-friendly solution, but how do those telecommunications and communications companies that have contracts greet that? What's their reaction, and how do you interact with that force in the multiple dwelling unit space?
Some of our customers are very large tier 1 operators, and they embrace it to an extent because that's how they can stay ahead of the competition. So a part of them is receptivity. Where we see more of a challenge is the smaller regional operators that we work with. They come into a facility, and we've seen it in San Francisco is one example. We've seen it in smaller towns, 5,000 to 10,000 people only. And there's someone has this kind of exclusive stranglehold almost on the market, and they have a hard time getting access to coax. In this case, though, the copper pairs are not covered normally by the same kind of long-term agreements. So they will use our technology on the telephone pairs to deliver the connectivity. We can still allow for legacy telephone services to go through, so you don't need to lose that. But we can then deliver high-speed internet and allow people to have access to all of these other things, IPTV, gaming, remote learning, and telehealth, and all of these other applications. So it's mostly the coax guys that have these long-term deals, more so than the telephone operators.
Right.
The coax guys started getting an advantage over the let's say the telco guys in bandwidth, and with the advent of fiber and the other sense, this balance is shifting. But essentially, having the choice to go over the copper pairs or over the coax is tremendous in the sense that it will give those options available to the carriers to go either or and still deliver your gigabit speeds.
Yeah.
Does your GAM technology perform the same or differently on copper versus coax within the building infrastructure?
The user experience is exactly the same. The management is the same. The only real difference is on two fronts. On coax, we can leverage the splitters that were put there for cable TV 20, 30 years ago, before even DOCSIS, and that are now used by DOCSIS. We use the same splitters. So there is some economy of scale where one port of our GAM can serve multiple doors, up to 16. And that's the technology. So that you can, the cost per port is a little less, whereas on telephone pairs, it's always point to point. So that's the difference. But as I said before, on telephone pairs, there is no incumbency considerations, anything that would prevent you as an alternate or competitive operator to get into the building and offer services.
Bruce is making some more good points. Let me just read this one here for everyone in our audience. If there is municipal fiber, then it is agnostic. The municipality then opens up tenancy on the network for all ISPs, providing complete competition. This is kind of an open access model we've certainly talked about and had a lot of discussion and reporting on this on Broadband Breakfast. Then property owners won't care because just one fiber line needs to come into the building. Huge sales point for rentals to have high-speed connectivity included in the rent. Any reaction to this, Reg or Pierre?
I think it's great. Go ahead, Pierre.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. We've designed the solutions. That's where the technologies in itself would not necessarily cater to an open access approach. So we've implemented our solution to be conducive to open access, where multiple ISPs could share the same fiber into the building, and then offer a freedom of choice to the tenants that can pick ISP number 1, 2, or 3, depending on the package, on the service, or for whatever reason drives them to pick one over the other. So, and I think we've been working a lot with the MDU community. There was a study done about 2 years ago, pre-pandemic, that showed that the first amenity, or number one amenity that people look for when they look for a new apartment or condo unit, is availability of a gigabit service, or at least very high broadband speeds. That was before pandemic at 86%. So now I'm sure if they were to do the same survey, that number did not go down, that's for sure. So yes, it brings value to the property. They could charge, according to that same survey, up to, people were willing to pay 8% more on their monthly rent to have access to that utility or that premium service. And the value of the property was going up on average by 3%. So that there's significant value on all fronts by having this high-speed access, no questions.
So in the remaining minutes we have, I want to touch on at least 2 more questions, plus any others that our panelists, that our guests choose to flow through here. One is in the non-MDU space. Could you just talk about any adaptations that need to be made? You know, whether we call them garden apartments, or again, this is going back to that 800-foot discussion we started off with. And then I'll have a final question to come back on so how long this technology will be necessary before we have fiber to every, you know, apartment and node. So let's take those 2 questions.
So the first one, the main differences for garden style homes, smaller MDUs, rows of townhouses, as we call them in Canada, is that you don't have a wiring closet per se. So you have to serve them from the outside in. So you're at the curb, you're at some cabinet where fiber terminates, or there's a fixed wireless, there's a radio up on a pole that serves the area. We connect there and then we enter the properties. So that means that wherever we're installed, there is no local power, 9 times out of 10. So you need to have solutions that can be powered from the MDU or from the tenants, ideally, that will only provide power to the port that is serving them. You don't want to power your neighbor, you power the port that is serving you. And that's critical, having this, what it's referred to as reverse power feeding. So that's critical to give a flexibility as to the placement of the solution and using the right physical telephone pairs or coax that enters the property. So that's item number 1. And then sometimes you may, wherever you have your broadband drop, fixed wireless or fiber, may be more than, say, 500, 600, 800 feet from the property. So you need to have a technology that can reuse existing coax or telephone pairs and kind of a daisy chain or hub and spoke architecture to go further out and extend the service very cost effectively. So that's another element that is critical.
You might want to mention the fact of saving on splits in rural areas.
Yeah, so one challenge that we've seen with rural markets, RDOF highlighted that, but it's also not limited to RDOF, is GPON is going to be one of the preferred technology, probably the dominant one by far. GPON was designed from the get-go for high-density urban markets. So you have a single fiber that comes to a point, you have this passive splitter, so that's the PON element to the solution, and then you have a limited distance from that point on where you can go into the properties themselves because of the attenuation of the signal with all of this equipment. If you're in the urban area, but you will pass, usually you have a 1:32 split, maybe 1:64 in some extreme cases. You will have 32 to 64 doors within 1 or 2 blocks. no more than that. So distance is not a concern. When you go into a rural market where you have 5-6 ohms per mile, suddenly that attenuation becomes a major factor. So what we do with our technology is we can use the telephone pairs. Coax, we could technically, it's just less present, to reduce the number of splits. So one drop of fiber can then serve 2, 3, 4, 5 ohms. Sometimes only one. One may be so isolated that it's a 1-for-1, but then we save the time to market and all that by reusing the wiring. But when we use our gamma as a virtual PON splitter to an extent, then we can go further out and then maximize the number of ohms that can be served by a fiber port on the OLT. And that reduces the cost for the operator. That reduces then the cost to the end user, because now everyone gets and it takes the FCC dollars or the Biden administration's dollars that will be put on the market to cover more ohms. And therefore, everyone gets their better bang for the buck.
We got a good question from Dwayne Douglas here, speaking about the MDU space within urban underserved areas. There doesn't exist wire cable management. Each call for internet turn-up requires a truck roll. Also within underserved areas is not only the affordability an issue, adoption is a major issue as well. Tenants are not able to afford increases on rent or broadband. An affordable approach is needed. What reactions do you have to that, Pierre and Reg?
That's very true. So one of the things that our customers are doing is when they install a GAM, they will install what we call an endpoint device in each of the homes, in each of the apartments, whether someone signs up for the service now or not. Whenever someone wants to sign up, then they have a self-care portal, a little bit like what you see as a hotspot when you go to your local cafe, the airport, or wherever you have open access Wi-Fi. And then you can decide on the package that you want. And hopefully there's enough market pressure to have affordable packages that do 50 meg, 100 meg, whatever, and then hire more rich packages for the ones that can afford it. And people can sign up without needing a truck roll. There's no need to wait in line for someone to talk to a live operator and all that. So that reduces the operation cost for the operator, and then they can hopefully pass on some of those savings to their customers, or at least be incentivized to provide better coverage in buildings that otherwise might be ignored.
Right. And we're getting more ideas here about subsidies through municipality for an open access approach. These again are good ideas and good reasons for us to continue to come back to the open access question. We are just 2 minutes away, and I want to give both of you a chance to say some closing remarks, but I want you to address the question I asked earlier, which is to say, are buildings now building fiber to the unit? Is this going to be a problem, I guess, forever, or are we going to see an end point to the need for this technology making use of advanced speeds over older technologies? Who would like to go first in your closing thoughts there?
I'll make a quick comment. The question is, what is the bandwidth that people will need? Obviously, when you build new buildings, you can go fiber or new technologies right away. But in the older buildings, you've got so many of them. Are you going to destroy them? Are you going to do massive infrastructure builds? And when will 1 gigabit symmetrical not be enough for those residents? That's the question.
Yeah. And maybe if I add on to Reg, as part of an analysis a few months ago, I looked at the survey results from, I think it was 2017, from the US government. I wanted to figure out how many MDUs of, say, 4 to 8 doors up to 16, and then the big ones, 100 plus doors. And you could see that the year that these buildings were built, the mix was that over 90% of the buildings were 15 years or older. So it means that if you do 10% renewal of the buildings every 10 years, we're good for another century before all these buildings would be updated, right? But the technology now is we deliver gigabit speeds today. The ITU ratified last year an evolution to the standard that will allow 5 gigabits speeds over the telephone pairs and 10 gigabit speeds over coax. And this time it will be fully symmetrical bandwidth. So there's a lot of life left into these assets before the bandwidth requirements would overcome what can be delivered on those existing infrastructure. We got ways
Lots
to
of
go.
great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Pierre. Lots of great questions keep coming in. Thank you, Jason Henley, for your point about utilizing other technologies in the last mile. And we'll have to address these at a future occasion. Before I thank our guests, I just want to remind everyone that we will be back next Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern time. We're going to be doing what we call an Ask Us Anything on the subject of the emergency broadband benefit and the emergency connectivity fund. And we'll be continuing this Ask Us Anything for the entire month with sessions on the 12th dealing with net neutrality, the 19th, dealing with spectrum, and the 26th dealing with Section 230. On behalf of our guests, Reg Weiser and Pierre Trudeau of Positron Access, I'm Drew Clark with Broadband Breakfast. We'll see you